We can start then with our first speaker. I'd like to introduce Phil Carey. Phil is our Associate Dean for Education, and he is going to kick-start the conference this morning, talking to us about linking education, practice and research. So Phil, would you like to come up?
Do I need to do anything with this microphone? This is where I can show all. I feel a little bit like Madonna now. Been waiting for that for years. Oh, no, can't even get the mic on. Wait a minute. Is that working? It's not about you, it's about the camera. Okay, everyone. Thank you very much. I've learned 2 lessons from Jim. 1, pre-record your presentation. 2, make sure you've got sweat off your glasses at the beginning. I don't know whether anyone else noticed that. Okay, my name, for those of you who don't know me, is Phil Carey. I'm the one in the booklet who looks 10 years younger and like I've been drinking heavily. Only one of those things is true. So yeah, talking of which, where's that gin? And I'm going to talk to you about, as you can work out from the slide, linking educational research and practice. And I was very flattered to be asked. I have a suspicion I was about 19th in a long line of people who was asked, oh God, well, we might as well have Phil Carey. Very flattered to be asked. And one of the options I had was to talk about my own research, and I thought that would be terribly arrogant. And I was glad I did that, because looking at the programme of events over the next few hours, I really don't think my research necessarily would stand up with all of that. So I'm really, really pleased I went for this option, really to explore some of the relationships between learning and teaching. I'm going to argue that research-informed teaching is the basis of what it is to be in a university. And for a student's point of view, I guess research-informed learning is the whole emphasis of what they're here for. I will reflect on some of my own personal experiences and some of my own research, but I'll also try and draw in a few wider examples from across the faculty, just to indicate, I think, the breadth of excellent practice that is going on here. So, this is a quote from Alvin Toffler. Alvin Toffler wrote Future Shock, and in his, he's dead now, but in his online CV thing, he's described as a futurologist. And I always imagine when he meets people, he says, I'm Alvin Toffler, I'm a futurologist, and I predict you're probably a bit jealous of my job title, because I'd love to be called a futurologist. Never got anywhere near that. But I actually think this quote, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. I think that's a pretty good notion of what it is we're trying to do in the university. We're trying to create individuals who will constantly question an ever-changing and challenging world. They need to be equipped with the skills to challenge authority, to shape the future. We as teachers are working with the change agents of the future. We're also working with the researchers of the future. And if you like, the idea of learning, unlearning, and relearning actually is also a metaphor for the journey that you go through when you do your own research. It's certainly, I've done quite a lot of unlearning in my own research career, perhaps a little too much of that, but we'll leave that. And in terms of teachers, a few years ago, the National Union of Teachers ran a campaign, and the strapline was, if you can read this, thank a teacher. It's a very powerful message about the importance of teaching in our society. And I think if you can learn, unlearn, and relearn, thank a lecturer. They've given you those skills. And good teaching isn't just about instruction. It's about questioning or facilitating in others the ability to question. Therefore, I would say a good teacher in a university needs to be a researcher. They need to demonstrate the skills of inquiry. That doesn't have to mean that they need to have, 4 level 3 rated publications and be referable and all that sort of stuff, though that's nice. But I would say they need to be involved in that systematic process of investigating issues around their subject specialism or their practice. This is what differentiates us from other institutions. At the moment, there's a plethora of organisations ready to deliver higher education in the United Kingdom. It hasn't happened yet. It is going to happen. Pearson, McDonald's could open their own university. We will be different because we teach from a research point of view. And those of you who are able to come to the university's research and practice in higher education series might have seen a talk from Camille Candico. And Camille wrote the QAA report, which was entitled Student Expectations and Perceptions of Higher Education. And in this, she found that students want and expect their lecturers to be researchers. What they don't want, though, is those lecturers to present their research in a disconnected way, in an esoteric way, or in a way that makes the student feel like they're in second place to the research agenda. And I think there's a risk in higher education that might be happening. If you look at the literature on research and teaching in higher education, you often come across this idea of a research-teaching nexus. And the idea of a nexus is that somehow research and teaching together exploit the synergies of the two activities that create new insights and develop the researchers of the future. So they're in a mutually beneficial relationship. And I would suggest that this is under great threat at the moment. And I think that threat comes from a number of causes, and you'll know many of these. First of all is the imposition of a market in higher education. Who thought that would be a good idea? Clearly not me. The notion of internal and external competition in higher education is actually undermining what it is the university is about. We fight each other for funding. Interestingly, the one area at the moment we're not fighting each other for really is students. We pretend we are, but we've got a pretty captive market when it comes to students. Universities historically have just been able to rely on students coming through their doors. They don't have to do a great deal. So a lot of that emphasis is then going on to the big research grants, particularly from the more research-intensive universities. So what we've got then is we've got a system that has a widely different status between research and teaching, and a system that increasingly emphasises research over teaching. And I think there's a real danger to that. Part of that is due to a government reduction in funding, but part of it is also due to institutional priorities. And I think it's worth reflecting on our own institutional priorities. Our reward and recognition mechanism for educators in this university is much below that for researchers. Our reward and recognition system for educators takes talented teachers and offers them the only route of promotion out of the classroom into a management role. It doesn't happen as much in research. I'm not saying it doesn't happen at all, but the idea that you would take people who are really good at something and then reward them by taking them away from what they're really good at, to me, just doesn't make sense. We're not the only institution who's like that. This is a constant source of frustration right across the sector. There's also been a substantial and evidenced reduction in the amount of teaching that students get. Students spend less time in lectures and classrooms and seminars now than they did 20, 30, 40 years ago. And when they do spend time in classrooms, they're often in classrooms like this, which is a very different learning experience from the sort of Oxford model of the seminar, sitting in the room with the great minds of the world and exploring the problems. And then we have a threat of teaching-only contracts. I think these would be hugely damaging to higher education. How can you have a university sector that says we are going to have the best teaching the best and then put people on different contracts? It just doesn't make sense to me. And the rhetoric at the moment is beginning to pick up around the idea that things have gone awry. This is a quote from David Willits. Sorry, I'm just going to bring up a little bit of my breakfast there. Don't like the man, and I'm a bit alarmed that I'm putting it in a presentation, but it did sort of make sense to me. There you go. One for the coalition, one thing that has made sense in my life. Looking back, we'll wonder how the higher education system was ever allowed to become so lopsided away from teaching. Now, arguably, the government have done all that through their policies. I'm not saying that they're not hypocritical. But I think that's an important point to note. Now, Willits has come from a rather banal idea that students are consumers and students will improve teaching by exercising their consumer power. I don't think that's going to happen. So I'm more impressed with the sort of ideas from the Academy of Medical Sciences. Government departments, research funding councils, higher education institutions, that's us, Learned societies and individuals must all take urgent action to restore the status of teaching in UK universities. A change, I don't know why and change, a change in attitudes is needed and quickly. And they've talked about this, if you're interested in it, it's a document called Redressing the Balance. And they say that actually the way we are managing our universities today is going to destroy British science in the future, because we're not creating the scientists of the future. We're so wrapped up in a world of research only that we are ignoring the need to put research out there. So, there's a bit of motherhood and apple pie for you. This is a key thinker in American higher education theory, a guy called Lindley Stiles. I won't read it out, it's poetry. I find poetry a wee bit embarrassing. But I think that idea, all must agree the best should teach. And that's what we're talking about. The best are researchers who are teachers, or teachers who are researchers. The two go together, much like Rama Lama 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 Ding Dong goes together. A good teacher in a university is a good researcher in a university. There really is no distinction between that. And how it works is through something that we could call, and we do call, research-informed teaching. And this takes four forms: research-led, research-oriented, research-based, and research-informed. This is where I find out whether the hyperlinking works. Research-led teaching, then, is a curriculum developed from subject matter that is based on the specialist interests of tutors. And disciplinary knowledge is massively important to us. It allows us to be cutting edge, and research makes the process of being cutting edge that much easier. My personal research is in higher education, and I also teach, and some of you will know, and will have suffered it, on the postgraduate certificate of higher education here in the university. Doing research in higher education has incentivized me to explore theory and ideas and attitudes and assumptions and all that sort of baggage in higher education that, frankly, just developing a lecture wouldn't do. It's made me a better lecturer. It's also made it a lot easier because I know the stuff and I find it very easy to retrieve it. I have been known to develop some lectures where, 2 hours before I'm desperately Googling issues to find out what the truth is. I don't need to do that in higher education because I feel very confident in it, because I see myself anyway as an active researcher in it. And students value their tutors' contribution to the academic environment. It instills in them a confidence that their tutors are good enough. They're good enough to be published. It also instills in them a sense of pride. My tutor is out there with the best. That's what we want for our students to think about us: pride and confidence. And actually, this is something the faculty appears to do very well in this. The Student Voice report on research-informed teaching that the Students' Union produced recently actually suggests in this faculty a lot of students recognise that lecturers are bringing their research into teaching. So I think, we're a very performative institution. You'll find this out. And so, and I think, we on a league table of research-informed teaching, we're actually quite near the top in terms of student recognition. So I guess that's well done to all of us. So that's, beg your pardon. That's the research-led curriculum. The research-oriented curriculum is really a curriculum which creates the researchers of the future. It focuses on the skills of inquiry and the development of a sort of research culture and research ethos, an understanding of research, of what research is. And my view is that whether or not students will do research is a moot point. If we have 50 graduates in a room, maybe only one of them will ever go on to do higher level research. Whether or not they will become a consumer of research is beyond debate. If they are going to go into any profession, they need to be evidence-based. They need to consume research. So they need to be literate in research. So teaching those skills, instructing them in how research works so they can question and analyze that research is fundamentally important. If we don't do it, we're letting them down. And being an active researcher can make you a lot better at this. But there's a risk, and the risk is it can make you a lot worse because you forget what it's like to be a novice. And I think that's quite important. And Conan actually presented a talk at our 2012 Learning, Teaching and Assessment conference where he made a very eloquent argument that actually an awful lot of research methods education appears to be designed to confuse and baffle students rather than let them into the club. So that's something that we might like to pick on. I hope I don't do it, but sometimes I confuse myself when I'm teaching research, so God knows what the students are thinking of it. So that then is the research-oriented curriculum, and this is the research-based curriculum. A curriculum that is designed around inquiry rather than the acquisition of fact. Of course, you could argue that the two are very similar things. Arguably, the best way to learn about research is to actually do it. And students doing research is a hugely important thing. And I'd like to draw your attention, is anyone here from Education Studies? Yeah, to the Spark Journal in Education Studies, a journal, a staff-student collaboration that actually champions research publication from students. It's a fantastic idea. It's something that as an institution we should be very proud of, and we are, because they won one of the Learning and Teaching Awards last week at the Learning and Teaching Conference. Now, my research is in student engagement in higher education, and actually this is the pinnacle. It's the epitome of student engagement. The idea that we work with students as partners in the creation of knowledge is just about as good as you can get in terms of higher education theory. And again, to name our Research and Practice in Higher Education series, Mike Neary, who's top of his field in this, came and talked to a group of us about what he calls research-engaged teaching. And he offers this as a pedagogic device for transforming the curriculum, for making it a radical space where people can work. And that's all about those notions of partnership. And sometimes I was reflecting on this. When I was listening to Mike, I did find myself sinking into that despairing point, oh, I haven't got the time to do this. And actually, I found myself thinking, recently I've been supervising a lot of students through their dissertations, and I've found myself going that little bit further in terms of working with them. And it's not because I'm a massively magnanimous and generous individual, but it's because I'm actually interested. I've found it quite exciting to be with them on that research journey. I've learned an awful lot about my practice and the issues they're exploring through working with students in terms of their research practice. And I guess that's something that you might be able to identify with. This also provides a fantastic opportunity for students to contribute to our understanding of how we engage in our education practice. And the university this year has introduced for the first time its graduate intern scheme. Those interns are all about curriculum enrichment. There's 17 across the university, 6 of them in this faculty, so that's a good result for us. And they all have somewhere in their bases that notion of inquiry, students learning about the curriculum to teach us how to do it better. What could be better than that? And then the final model is an idea of a curriculum that draws on an investigation of what it is, what learning, teaching, and assessment is. We need an evidence base for our practice, and one of the things that I'm shocked at in higher education is how lax we are at actually establishing that evidence base. We're very good at anecdote, we're very good at assumption. We're not very good at actually finding the truth behind what they talk about. Now, I've mentioned my research in student engagement. Part of that is about student representation. Student representation has been part of the governance of higher education for 800 years. It's an awful long time. Last year, I had a paper published in student representation, and in one fell swoop, I doubled the number of British publications about student representation. One paper had been produced in Britain over 800 years about something that is a key thing that we do all the time, and we assume it's good. I'm not saying it's not good, but where's the bloody evidence base for that? We do need to be much more assertive in that. As a teacher as well, examining the evidence base can force us to challenge our perceptions. And I don't know, is Mel here? Mel Hills? She's not been able to make it. I want to name check the work of Mel Hills. Mel presented a piece of research at our Learning, Teaching and Assessment Conference last week on student views of anonymous marking. And I'd talked to Mel about this, and I really wanted her to find out that students didn't want anonymous marking, that they trusted us implicitly and all that sort of thing. I was ever so disappointed. They had a nuanced view of anonymous marking. They understood some of the difficulties of it, but really they wanted it. And to me, that was interesting because I was faced with evidence that challenged my perceptions. And that's the important thing about pedagogic inquiry. It might just indicate we're not doing it right. And that's what we need to do. That's how we need to learn. So that's our curriculum model. And this is what's called research-informed teaching, and I'd say it's actually research-informed learning. Students learning about others' research. Students learning to do research. Students learning in research mode. In other words, in the activity of research. And then, in itself, pedagogical research. That's research-informed learning, so this must therefore be research-informed teaching. This is what those of us who teach need to be doing. We need to explicitly refer to our own and others' research in our curriculum and our lectures. We need to explain and explore methodology, and research conventions to our students. We need to support our students through their own research journeys and recognise that that's going to improve our research journeys. And we need to engage in pedagogic research. So, just to finish off, there are a number of opportunities that you can be involved in to do that. This is just a handful of them. Over summer and into the next year, next academic year, I want to set up a research-informed teaching forum, and that will be a space which isn't minuted, and it's not going to be, it's not going to be killed with the weight of bureaucracy, but a space where people who are interested in the relationship between research and teaching can just to get together over a coffee and talk about what it means. I don't think as an institution there are enough spaces for us to talk about our practice, so we need to be creating some of those spaces. These sorts of conferences are great opportunities to do that, so my job is to take that forward. So you can test me on that one. You will also be getting invitations to research and practice in higher education seminars. Last year we had 4 or 5 of these across the universities, and we had some key thinkers coming to John Moores and talking to groups of people. Mike Neary, Camille Kandinko, Alex Buckley from the HEA, Sue Bloxham, all big names in higher education research. So they're great opportunities to come and learn, but also to work with people from across the university to talk about some of these ideas. I was at Mike Neary's presentation, and a member of the team that I'm in actually has ended up as a result of that forging a link with someone from the business school to look at opportunities to bring together business education and health and social care education. I mean, isn't that what it's all about? You will, of course, know about the Learning and Teaching Conference. This faculty always punches well above its weight in the Learning and Teaching Conference. 22 papers in last week's conference. Awards are plenty. I can go on and on about that. There will, of course, be next year's. The great thing about the conference is it gives you an opportunity to just offer a small piece of pedagogic research, something that you perhaps wouldn't think about getting published, but it's important to disseminate. It's a great space for institutional research. And then finally, we have in the university something called an Innovations in Practice journal. And that's a journal designed for the publication of locally based research. So, thank you very much for listening to me. I did say I'd last 20 minutes. I've only just gone over the time, which, believe me, is unusual. So we've got a bit of time for questions or comments or ideas. I'll put my glasses on now so I don't have to read anything.